This podcast is supported by MIDI Health. Are you in midlife, feeling dismissed, unheard, or just plain tired of the old healthcare system? You're not alone. In fact, even today, 75% of women seeking care for menopause and perimenopause issues are left entirely untreated. But it's time for a change. It's time for MIDI. MIDI's not just a healthcare provider. It's a women's telehealth clinic founded and supported by world-class leaders in women's health. Their clinicians provide one-on-one, face-to-face consultations where they truly listen to your unique needs. They offer a full range of holistic, data-driven solutions that isn't one-size-fits-all care. This is care uniquely tailored for you. At MIDI, you will find that their mission is clear: to help all women thrive in midlife, giving them access to the healthcare they deserve. Because they believe midlife isn't the middle at all. It is the beginning of your second act. Ready to feel your best and write your second act script? Visit joinmidi.com today to book your personalized, insurance-covered virtual visit. That's joinmidi.com. MIDI, the care women deserve.
Yay Networks.
So yeah, I think every year around this time, we get hit with so much stuff on Instagram, social media, even in news articles about this new revolutionary pill or diet product or whatever is going to completely change your life, and new year, new you, and all of those kinds of phrases out there. And then when you start to really peel back the layers and look at the actual science behind it or lack thereof, you realize that, at best, this is maybe going to cause some frustration and cost us some money. But at worst, it could actually be harmful to you too. And so I really like to help people understand how to evaluate for themselves. You don't necessarily always have to just wait for some expert on the news to explain it to you. There are some pretty easy steps that you can do to kind of validate or verify things for yourself.
A quick note before we dive into today's podcast. If you like what you hear, I would love for you to subscribe to Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, wherever you download your podcast. It would also be incredible if you take a minute to rate and review this podcast. Those things do matter, and they really help us. I'm Molly Kimball. Welcome to Fueled, a wellness and nutrition podcast. I'm a registered dietitian and nutrition journalist with a passion to help people live their strongest, healthiest life possible. In my weekly TV segments and columns, there's a limited amount of time and space to cover everything, but there's so much more to share. This podcast is my opportunity to dive deeper into the topics you want to know about. In this week's episode, we are talking about research. I am with brilliant researcher Amy Feehan, and one of the things that I say about this podcast is, we're interviewing different experts on different topics related to wellness, related to nutrition, and I love doing this podcast, hosting this podcast, because I'm constantly learning. And it's like having that expert in a specific field that you're also talking to kind of as your best friend. And that's exactly what we've got today with Dr. Amy Feehan. I think you're going to love it. So Amy is a clinical research scientist with Ochsner Health. She was trained in the neuroscience PhD program at Tulane University. Her dissertation work included preclinical drug development of new non-addictive opioid compounds to treat pain. Very cool. And a couple of years ago, in 2019, she joined the Ochsner Infectious Diseases Department to work on leveraging microbes, essentially using our gut microbiome to treat neurological disease and drug-resistant organisms. Early in the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, she led the Ochsner team in COVID prevalence studies in the New Orleans and Baton Rouge areas. And as the pandemic has shifted to include vaccines and these different variants of the virus, Amy has been awarded $1.5 million by the Louisiana Department of Health to track and analyze the different variants that we're seeing here in South Louisiana. So with that, Amy, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
As we're recording this, it's going to air early January. We're doing this right before holidays. You are smack in the middle of COVID sequencing.
Yes. And actually, we've just started to see the first upticks in the Omicron variant, which I'm sure everyone will be sick of by the middle of January, or hopefully not sick with. But I'm hoping that everyone this holiday season will just be testing and staying careful and masking and doing all those things that we know help in avoiding the spread of disease.
So that as we're hearing this, it will be maybe not as dramatic.
I hope we'll be on the downward curve by the time people are hearing this. Yes.
And so I'm grateful for you carving out the time for this, because you were on overdrive. I mean, just the expertise and where your brain goes. What I love about you is that you can take something so incredibly complex and you break it down, like we said, like it is your best friend telling you the 411 on something.
Well, I personally truly believe that science should be democratized so that people can use all of the good research that we're doing a lot of the time with your tax dollars to understand their own health and to make decisions for themselves and their family. So I love to be able to break it down for people in a way that makes sense to them.
You're a brilliant scientist, but you're also a brilliant communicator.
Thank you.
Yes, I love it. So what we're talking today is, I was like, Amy, what are we going to call it? And, is it how to interpret the research that you're seeing the headlines for? And she had the title for this.
I mean, how to call BS when you see those sensational headlines, because, I get drawn into, the news, or even an article that people are sharing could say something really outlandish. One of our examples today is, trace amounts of formaldehyde in your food are dangerous. And just hearing that, if you're not someone who has ever analyze scientific literature or knows how to think about it, that sounds really scary. And it seems like something that, you need to pay attention to, or what should you do next? And a lot of times when you read through these articles and look at the primary source, you find out that's not quite the message that the scientists were trying to convey in their work.
So we'll be sharing some of the headlines that we find maybe a little hilarious, some of the experiences that we've had, with Amy as a scientist, with me as a dietitian, that we're asked questions, or there's different interviews that we've asked to be a part of. And then once you're in it, you're like, wait a second, this is where it's going. We're going to share a few of those with y'all. And then Amy's going to walk us through, what does she look at? What are the questions she asks when she's presented with this headline, with this sensational, little news bite or sound bite? So for starters, what are some of the things that are just some of the most wildly outrageous?
I feel like every other week you're hearing about how chocolate can save you from heart disease, or wine keeps you from, dementia or something like that. And it's just, anytime there's something that overstated and that simplistic, you can kind of call BS right away.
Coconut oil.
Yeah.
Same.
Yeah.
Coconut oil and Alzheimer's,
Yep.
There's some, and so I think that is kind of lesson one, when there's one product, one food item, one ingredient, and it is solving this global within our bodies crisis. One compound is not going to, that alone, shift the entire
biology. Correct.
Right.
Yeah. And I always like to think of biology as kind of like a soup of things going on at any given time. When you learn in your biology courses in school, a lot of times you break it down to really simple pathways, and X leads to Y, and maybe there's an enzyme that makes it happen faster. But the reality is that all of these compounds are circulating in your body at the same time. So the idea that something like coconut oil cures Alzheimer's, that's a very complex chronic disease. If one thing solved it, we definitely would have noticed from a public health perspective by now.
I like thinking of it as a big soup.
It is. Yeah. Everything's running into everything else,
Right.
and it all is kind of working together. So saying A to B in one person might be true, but in another person, A to B might be affected by E, F, G, and Z,
I think this is also really important. There are, especially on social media, there's a lot of these scare tactics that are used, and people who, whatever their kind of angle is, that they're instilling fear around a lot of things. And so I'll get questions about Orgain is a protein powder, and as the name would imply, it's organic. They have whey, they have plant-based, but I'll have people asking what's wrong with it, because I saw on so-and-so's social media why it's bad and why instead I should do this other product. And it's a very elitist approach, but there's these, very singular ingredients or compounds that are in almost every food that, I don't want to say people like that, but people who are, kind of in a path of, they may be like the clean eating doctrine or there, but it's so restrictive and they're just picking it apart.
Right. And I think an important point you bring up is that it is very elitist and there's a privilege that goes along with saying, oh, I'm only going to choose to have X, Y, and Z in my food. I follow a couple of food scientists on Instagram, and I would recommend that people maybe add that to the repertoire if possible to get kind of a balanced view. I think a lot of times influencers, you got to look at who's paying their bills, and if they're, sporting the latest vitamin gummy that's going to solve all your problems, chances are they're getting paid to do that. So, are you getting a balanced view is really, I think, the first point I want to bring up in all of this. Consider the source. So if it's even a news source or an influencer or somebody who time and time again, whatever they say turns out to be exaggerated, false, all that kind of stuff, probably stop using them as a source moving forward, but investigate that source first when you're considering something like a supplement or other nutrition.
I think to that point, when it comes to social media, now you're going to get the stuff that we're about to talk about, you're going to get this from all angles. You can get it in print media, digital, as well as social media. Unfollow. When you're seeing consistently there's someone who is escalating fears unnecessarily, and you're sort of starting to tune into it and you see a few, and then once you realize that, yes, that is what's happening, stop following that person.
Yeah,
stop
I
getting
agree.
them that credibility.
Yep. And the other thing is, one big one that always makes me roll my eyes is, oh, there's chemicals in it.
Talk
you should be
about that. Yeah.
You should be aware that literally everything you see, touch, and breathe is chemicals. And so to say something like, oh, there's chemicals or there's toxins is another thing that just drives me insane. A toxin really, and the dose makes the poison is a common phrase in toxicology. So, like certain amounts of something are not bad, but if you drank 6 gallons of water, that'll kill you because you'll drown. So like water is not toxic, but at that level it is. Our livers and our kidneys and everything else are made to filter out things that would not benefit us. And there obviously are lots of medical conditions where they don't work as well. But for the most part, like things that are FDA cleared and approved and all that kind of stuff, there's not going to be toxic levels of anything in them, or people would be dropping dead left and right.
And chemicals make up so much. And just because something is a chemical doesn't mean that it is scary.
H2O is a chemical, and that's water. And without that, you will die.
So I think that that's a really good point of when we're avoiding chemicals, or sometimes avoiding things we can't pronounce. A lot of times that can be good because they are things that you're like, wow, this actually is not necessary in this food. But there's other things that maybe we just they have multiple syllables.
Yes, absolutely. And you know what? Chemists, more than any other scientists, I think, they like to have a very structured system to how they name molecules. And so sometimes that means several prefixes and several suffixes. Yeah. And so yes, it gets long. Yes, it gets difficult to pronounce, but it'll tell any chemist exactly what the shape of that molecule is. And so like there's too many molecules in the world to give them nice fuzzy names that everyone can say. And no one is really doing chemistry trying to, well, consumers might need to say this one day, so we'll name it in a way that's appropriate for them. And yeah, so the idea that just because you can't pronounce it means it's not good is kind of ridiculous.
So some of the headlines, I think some of the easy, like high levels that we see, how good wine is for our heart,
yep.
How good chocolate is for blood pressure, everything else. The reality on those things is that it is the compounds in cacao. Now, when we look at dark chocolate, even regular dark chocolate may not have enough of these compounds to have an impact. Things like water. There is so many studies or headlines, we should say, about studies that like really oversimplify water and weight loss, water and energy. I mean, water is the cure-all for these things.
Water is good. I mean, you should drink water every day, but is it going to cure things? I don't know.
Some that I've gotten, there's one interview that I had, and it was really fantastic because the person who was doing the interview, the person interviewing me, she knew this was borderline laughable, and it was for a journal. I won't say like which journal. It was for a journal, and she was like, we were writing about a study, and it was paid for by the Potato Board, and it was a study using potato puree as a sports gel. So like your goos.
Did it taste good?
I didn't taste it, but I'm like, who wants to just have squeeze into your mouth potato puree.
I'd rather maybe air fry it. I don't know.
I mean, I'm all about like, we're going to fuel and we're going to time our carbs with our athletic
And
performance.
truly love a potato, but maybe in that context, no.
It was so interesting. And so she was looking at, but what they were also trying to say was that it was superior to other carb sources, and that your pouch of potato. And I was like, I can't even get past squeezing potato puree as you're in the middle of like your Iron Man, And she was like, she got it. We were like, we can talk about carbs in general and the benefits of carbs in general, but we can't speak to the fact that a potato starch is going to be superior in this case. And it's all going to come down to what someone's going to do. And someone may choose to have that potato or that carb from that potato in a different form. But that was one, and there was actually a separate interview that she also had, not as entertaining as pouches of potato puree, but it was also about potatoes and health benefits of potatoes. And it was like interesting that both had been paid for by the potato board. Right. And she was coming to me as a dietitian, not to say, is this accurate? But really her editor wanted me to basically just verify it and vouch for it.
Right. Which, and did you get any data to go along with that?
Yes. They forwarded the research on it.
Anything convincing?
No.
Yeah. So, and especially if you're going to say that something is superior, you need to have a metric that it's superior by. What was it superior for? Is it superior because it's cheaper to make and more affordable, or because it releases, I don't know, available carbohydrates faster in a more sustained way? Or like that's the other part that I wanted to bring up, is like, what is your outcome? So what's your source? And then what's the outcome you're actually measuring? Because in a lot of these, it's that chocolate reduces heart disease or something, but it's not like someone with heart disease ate chocolate and then they got better. A lot of times it's, a bunch of lab rats had a bunch of this compound, and half of them in the chocolate group went on to have heart issues or something like that. So you have to ask, what are we actually measuring here? And I'm not sure what they were measuring in that study, but if they can't clearly show that it's superior in that metric, then you shouldn't be claiming that it is.
As you were saying that, it made me think about there's so much discrepancy in studies on sweeteners and artificial sweeteners, and talking about lab rats and how much and stuff. And so that's another one that I think really confuses people. There will be headlines that certain artificial sweeteners are linked to cancer. Then there's
brain
others,
softeners. And,
right.
Yeah.
And then there's others that show it's completely fine. And there's like, at a normal amount used in our food, it's fine.
Right.
Although my personal take on it is, let's try to do things as natural as possible. If we can avoid saccharin or aspartame or sucralose, let's do it. But if you just search, there's so much conflicting. Yep. And that would take literally going through each of those and seeing, was this in humans? Was it in animals?
Yep. And that's always the good first question to ask, because while, we obviously don't want to have horrible outcomes in human beings later on that we could have figured out in, a lab animal early on. If there's a big problem in lab animals, you probably want to, not maybe use that drug or food or whatever in humans. But I think for me, the most relevant data is to say, we looked at, and there's actually a lot of European countries do these great cohort studies where they follow people longitudinally over the course of their lives. They just track all kinds of information about them. Do you eat vegetarian? Do you consume butter? All these kinds of things. And then look at what happens to them in old age. Do you develop Alzheimer's? Do you have heart disease? All those kinds of factors. And so to me, those are the best kind of studies to say, like, okay, for these people who consumed it regularly throughout their lives, if we look at a group that did and a group that didn't, and we match them for things like age, BMI, lots of other factors, is there really a change here in whatever outcome you're trying to measure? Cancer risk, dementia risk, all that kind of stuff. So those to me are like peak gold outcome studies, looking at longitudinal use over a period of time. A lot of times those lab rat studies, if you, for example, I remember one, and I can't think of the exact title of it, but looking at how chocolate could affect heart disease, and the amount of the core ingredient, like you were talking about, they weren't actually giving them, Hershey bars. They were giving them this core ingredient.
Intense amounts of
so much much
the cacao extract.
that if a human person were to try to get that same amount of that product in the chocolate bar, they would be eating 300 chocolate bars a day, and they would fully have diabetes and so many other health problems, you know? So like that benefit is not even reasonable for someone to try to get out of that chocolate bar.
Let's take a minute to talk about Nutrafol, sponsor for this week's episode. The nutrients in Nutrafol supplements support healthy hair growth from within by targeting the 5 root causes of thinning: stress, hormones, environment, nutrition, and metabolism. Nutrafol is a physician-formulated nutritional supplement that's made with potent botanicals. No matter your stage in life, Nutrafol has a solution. Nutrafol offers targeted formulas for both women and men that are clinically shown to improve hair growth and thickness through all stages of life. And it's with medical-grade natural ingredients that also support our whole body health. It is possible to grow thicker, healthier hair and support our show by going to Nutrafol.com and entering promo code FUELED to save $15 off your first month's subscription. This is their best offer anywhere. It's only available to U.S. customers for a limited time. Plus, free shipping on every order. Get $15 off at Nutrafol.com. That's spelled Nutrafol.com, promo code FUELED. So when you're looking at, I'm going to stop and share the story. I don't know if I've shared it on this podcast, but when you keep talking about lab rats, I have to say. So in college, I worked at Pennington Biomedical Research Center in Baton Rouge. Love them. And I had waited tables at the Chimes. But where I got the experience and what really was kind of like a really just really was huge as far as development from that kind of like analytical brain was working at Pennington as a student worker. And so my first role there was working in a lab that was working with genetic research and studying the effects of fat genes. What was fascinating was the transgenic mice. So we fed diets, control diet, and then high fat, high sugar. And the transgenic mice exponentially gained weight on the high fat, high sugar. So they had that fat gene inserted in them. They exponentially gained compared to the control on the diet. So it was fascinating to see. But again, that's one where you're not going to go straight to that.
Right, of course not. Yeah. And in gene editing in humans is kind of in its infancy. We actually have a cool and off topic, but CRISPR is a new technology that can be used. It's like hijacked from bacteria, but can be used to splice genes into people and can be used for gene therapy for, you know, single gene based diseases like Huntington's or sickle cell, and has been successfully used in humans for, I think, both of those diseases, definitely in sickle cell, which is super cool. But obviously you're not just going to rampantly start gene editing people, because that would be irresponsible. We don't know what that could do. So that's why it has to happen in animals for that stage.
What is CRISPR?
CRISPR is the way, so bacteria actually float their genes around all the time. So that's how antibiotic resistance happens, actually, is that bacteria can learn from one another. Hey, this other bacteria was exposed to this antibiotic. It evolved this resistance gene so that it's not as susceptible next time. And then it can share that information with other bacteria to further, grow antibiotic resistant strains of whatever. So that is why if you ever get an antibiotic, and especially since everyone's getting, sick now, finish your course of antibiotics, even if you feel better. Otherwise, you might be breeding antibiotic resistant bacteria. And that is a rising problem. Across the US and across the globe right now. It's kind of like a slow simmering pandemic in the background that we're going to have to deal with at some point.
So to piggyback onto your public awareness message of that, I had a treatment that I did on my face. It was for precancer cells. And it was this cream that was a compound cream. It was like a chemotherapy agent. And I put it on liberally, not realizing that a grain of rice essentially was like the amount. Liberally, I got blisters. The blisters got infected. And I did a course of antibiotics, a 10-day course, which I was like, the last thing I want to do.
And they're usually not like small pills either.
Well, and it was just also you want to try to avoid that as much as possible. Well, after that 10 days, it was still actively infected.
Oh God.
And it was painful. It was like a little bit scary. It was like deep around my eyes and deep in my lips. And so my dermatologist had to prescribe a second course of antibiotics. And she said, welcome to the world of antibiotic resistant bacteria. This is what you've got. It is a resistant bacteria.
Yeah.
And that had developed like in my, in my face.
And you don't ever want to be in that position where that is a problem you're facing. And by the way, we have no agents left that are going to fix it.
Right. Thankfully, the second course that I did of a different antibiotic helped.
Right.
But
yep. Yeah. So
if?
then you have to go in like a multi-antibiotic strategy. And that's where like sequencing in bacteria can help too, because you can identify, exactly what types of resistance something has. But sequencing is expensive, although costs are coming down. So there's like this whole new world of antibiotic resistance. We can also, this is super cool and completely off topic, I realize at this point, but we can actually weaponize viruses. They're called bacteriophages that eat bacteria but don't do anything to human cells. So they've used these viruses for antibiotic resistant bacteria, and they just like put it in IV. They go and eat the bacteria, and then anything extra that any extra bacteriophages that are left over after the bacteria is gone just get excreted. So it's kind of cool from a drug development perspective because like these little things, microbes, have been going to war for millennia, and it's just kind of cool to use one against the other.
And that's what we were talking about in our intro as we were introducing you. Am I right about the kind of before you got into the COVID research, but that's your work on like leveraging these microbes.
Yes. Yeah. How can we leverage the microbes to treat human disease? There's estimates out there that microbes actually outnumber your human cells about 2 to 1. Some estimates take it as high as like 10 to 1. But basically, like you would not be you without your microbes. And so like learning to understand all of the microbiomes throughout your body,
that's cool.
And then how disease affects them and how we can use them to affect disease, I think will make huge strides, especially in treatment of neurological diseases.
And gut microbiome is one of your true passions.
Yeah, I love it.
Y'all have heard us talk about the Alcohol Free for 40 initiative on this podcast before. And Amy, I'm going to have you back close to the beginning or at the beginning of that so that we can talk about the research where actually Amy is working with our team to like submit the data for
from
publication.
Alcohol Free for 40.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's really cool too. Obviously I was a participant in Alcohol Free for 40 before I got to see anybody else's data, but was too curious not to ask. And then once we started looking, it's just really remarkable how just 40 days without alcohol can biometrically change you. And for myself too, looking at like cholesterol before and after, and it's like I didn't change the way I was eating, except maybe I wasn't doing late night pizza after drinking all night, those kinds of things. But if the one thing you change is just alcohol, like and you see those kinds of changes in your cholesterol and all that kind of stuff, like I don't know. It's a worthwhile endeavor before getting on a statin or something like that, I think.
Right. And so one of the things that we're like, it's one of our big dreams for the future, but to include, so with Alcohol Free for 40, we're looking at labs, what is someone's cholesterol, their triglycerides, their liver enzymes, the before and after this, and also the physical metrics, close-up photo of your face, your blood pressure, your body composition, muscle, fat mass. Amy and I would love to have gut microbiome be part of that evaluation so that we can see how does 40 days alcohol free impact gut microbiome, because we know that alcohol is one of the things that's just so destructive to a healthy gut microbes. Yeah.
And previous research has shown that, even just like one night of binge drinking can kind of alter your gut composition. But how much can it change from 40 days with no alcohol? I think that would be a really cool thing to see. Really cool.
So stay tuned. But Amy will be back to talk more about that data that we're talking about with Alcohol Free for 40. Okay, so coming back to this, coming back to
our main point after that long sidetrack.
When you're looking at these studies, so when we do see, the coconut oil with Alzheimer's, or that, something that seems like a very innocent food on our shelves is going to damage your joints or whatever. Yeah. What are the questions that you ask? What are the things that you look for? Kind of like walking us through, first of all, you're looking to see, where's this published? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Step one for me is okay, was this found on, I don't know, trueresearchtoday.com, which I've never heard of before and sounds kind of sketchy. Maybe I would definitely trust that a lot less than a major news network that typically does fact checking, or, is more responsible about how they report things. That's not always true for sure. But if you're finding it on some weird website, I would approach with caution at the very least. The second thing I usually do is skim through the article,
Find the link to the article.
Yes, find the link to the primary research. And one great resource to actually look at primary articles is PubMed. And this is like all of the taxpayer funded research that's happening in the US and beyond the US. You can just search in the search bar for, key phrases, or if you know the actual title of the article or the authors, you can search that way. And if there's, this is a good tip too. If for whatever reason, the article's behind a paywall, like they're saying you need to pay $50 to read this article.
Yeah, because you do see this often.
Yeah. So universities typically have all of that like paid for. So most people who work in research can get access. But what you can do is email the corresponding author and just ask for a copy, and they are perfectly allowed to give it to you.
Wow.
Yeah. So if you're interested in that, it's something that like, and who knows, if they have moved on to a different institution, that's not their email anymore, you might be out of luck. But that is one kind of workaround. And I know between researchers, we are always happy to hand it off to each other. But there should be a corresponding author on most articles.
And if you are with a university or like us with Oxnard, there's a library, you'll have a medical library, you'll have someone that you can reach out to say, hey, can we have a copy of this?
Correct. Yeah. Like we don't have access to this one, which we're pretty good about. As long as you're on like the Oshner network, you should be able to see most things because we pay for it. But
but not everyone has that.
Right.
So I didn't realize that. So,
I know. I didn't actually know that either.
Well,
but
seems
technically,
sort of like common sense, but it maybe feels a little intimidating to someone to do.
Absolutely. Or it feels like, these journals make a big deal about, that's their property now.
Yeah.
And, you're not supposed to like republish it anywhere else, obviously. But as the author, you can absolutely share
That's
it.
cool.
And people are usually happy to do so.
So looking at that journal article, looking to see also when it comes to the journal itself, you can rank these.
There's some a sniff test there, I'll say. And so what you can do is like literally just Google the name of the journal and then impact factor. And so the impact factor is kind of a metric of how often do things that are published in that journal get cited by other people. And so like, if you are publishing a bunch of really crappy research that no one is going to cite, you might be in an impact factor range of like 0.5. So that might be, like journals that people pay to get their article published quickly, or there's other sketchy things going on there. Sometimes predatory journals, the authors are not malicious, but the journal is saying, oh, hey, we just need one more article for our November issue. You can do it if you just pay us X amount of money. We don't have to do peer review or something like that. So there's definitely shady things that go on when you're in that like under one impact factor range.
What's good? What's the scale?
Good. So, okay, I would say a lot of people who the other thing that can impact impact factors is like if it's a very niche topic, there might not be a ton of people citing it because it's like a very limited group of scientists that are working on it. So like impact factors in the 2 to 3 range might be those kinds of journals, or they just publish a lot of information and the citations per publication might not be as high. So like 2 to 3 is decent. I think that I would consider that like a real, quote unquote, real journal. 5 is very solid. And then you've got like the extremely top tier, Nature, Science, Cell. Usually they're like single word title journals. And those are in like the 30 impact factor range. So it's kind of a weird scale, but
it is a weird scale.
Yeah.
Whenever 2 or 3 is okay, 4 or 5 is really good.
Yeah.
But then you can also still have a 30 or a 50.
Yes.
So I looked at the Journal of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics.
Yep.
The Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics is kind of the governing organization for registered dietitians. And that one is 4.14.
Yeah, solid journal. Yep.
But then I looked at the Journal of the American Medical Association, and it's 56.
Yes, that's a big one.
Yeah.
Yeah. And think about it. So when they put something out, a lot of clinicians, a lot of clinician scientists, people working in like that directly in the medical field doing research are reading that. So it's going to get cited more often.
Right.
So some of it too is like how many people are reading this and then see that article and know to cite it when they go to do their work.
Right.
So yeah.
Okay. So we're going
to
not just take at face value the snippet that we're reading online about this journal article, because headlines are sensational.
Yes.
And part of the reason that the misinformation or why these get spread so easily is because it is something that grabs our attention.
Right.
It's catching our fear. It's catching, it's something that is sensational and it's a talker.
Right. It also, I mean, and if we take the lens of maybe not blaming the media as much, you could also just say that like a lot of these scientific articles are very complex and nuanced.
Right.
So it's not just a straight line story, but the press has to make it into one because you can't have 50 words in the title
Right.
of your article.
Or you have a 2-minute segment.
Exactly. So you got to just like hit the high point.
Right.
And really, if you dig into the article itself, there might be a little bit more nuance there. Or when you see that something is 3 times as much as something else, well, it could have gone from 1% to 3%. And, that's 3 times as much, but it's not like it's
still not significant.
right.
Perhaps,
or it could be significant, but small.
Right.
So yeah, you have to kind of include all
Right.
of those factors. And so like when you go into looking at the journal article itself, there's several sections in a journal article. The introduction will give you kind of a little bit of background that's very focused just on the topic of that article. So you should have, read through that. That should be pretty available to most laymen who are reading it, unless it's super technical, like, I don't know, organic chemistry synthesis or something like that. Honestly, my eyes glaze over if I try to read something like that. But in health and nutrition, typically the introduction piece should be pretty easy to read through. And then you move on to the methods. And I always skip that part and go to the results and then come back and look at the methods when I have questions about how they got to those numbers. So you don't have to read it in order. The methods can really bog people down and sound overly complicated or like just kind of be too overwhelming. So sometimes you can just skip that and go to the results, look at the figures, try to understand what they're communicating with their graphs and tables. And then the discussion section, and I don't know that a lot of people know this. This is like kind of and I don't want to say creative writing, but it kind of is. It's where you put the results of your paper into the greater context. But this is really like kind of the opinion of the authors. How does our data fit with everything else? And so they're pulling in, sources and citing things, but it's their interpretation.
It's less objective, less just like data driven.
Right. So they could, and they can claim that, X means Y and whatever. But, you have to evaluate that on your own, looking at the articles that they're citing and comparing, maybe the way that they got their data wasn't quite right or, seems sneaky or overblown or whatever. And then they kind of evaluate it through their own lens. Okay. So I would take a little bit of precaution before, looking at the discussion and saying, this is what it all means. Okay. Right away. So I usually look at the results for myself and evaluate it for myself first.
Okay. And then anything else in the piece in the sections?
I think that's typically it. Another important part should be conflict of interest.
Yeah.
And it depends on the journal where that goes. Sometimes it's in the article itself. Sometimes it's in like an addendum or something like that. Conflict of interest is important. And then acknowledgements, they'll also maybe list like funding sources, things like that. So those are other little sections. And then the references should always be at the end. So you can kind of see, are those in good journals? Are they referencing, crack science from those crappy journals that we were talking about earlier?
Okay. So you see it online or you see it in your social media feed and you see kind of the hit. Here's your big blanket statement. Find where that research is, find where that study is. You're probably going to be able to find it on PubMed. You should be able to find it on PubMed.
Yeah. If it's not on PubMed, then that should be ringing some other alarm bells too.
And sometimes there are websites or just private websites. We could set up a website that would look like a journal database to someone.
Yep.
And so that is going to look, it looks very official, like maybe it's our initials and it's, it's got like kind of the header on it that looks like it's a journal database, but it isn't. But a lot of things look like this. Similarly, in print magazines, you see a lot of things that are like advertisements. They're almost like, and they'll say advertisement really small, but it's written to look like an article and sometimes written to look like a journal article.
Yeah.
And so we've got to be careful when we see that. But if you were to go look for that on PubMed, you're not going to find it because it isn't published research.
Correct.
It's just made to look like it.
And it's not peer reviewed research.
Right.
So sometimes, and people can put out, like review articles or whatever. Some review articles are peer reviewed and therefore, journals that are legit and everything. Some people can just put out like an opinion piece essentially.
Right.
And like that depends on who it's coming from. If it's an expert that you respect who's worked in that field for a long time, great, take it at that value. If it's like someone you've never heard of and they're suddenly mentioning a single pharmaceutical company 87 times,
Right.
like maybe we find out, who paid for this.
What about when a company says they have a white paper?
So yeah, white papers are not peer reviewed, but sometimes they can be useful. And a lot of times I think companies who want to share data but aren't going to go through the whole publication process, it's not really an academic exercise. It might be something more about like use of their product or their internal validation or something. It's not an academic thing that a journal would get excited about. So they might put it out in the format of a white paper. But yeah, you should realize that's not peer reviewed.
But a lot of times it's positioned to the public as if it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess that's true. Right. I always think of it as like, oh yeah, those aren't peer reviewed, but for a lot of people, white paper, that sounds very official.
Right.
And yeah, for sure.
And it can have the appearance of being very official, but it is not peer reviewed. So when you're seeing a headline or you hear a company say, "Oh, we have white papers on this topic," or whatever it is that you're seeing, here's this information that's catching your eye and is eliciting some response, some dramatic, oh my gosh, response. Look to see, where's it published? Can you find the study? Is it on PubMed? And PubMed we'll link to it, but it's just the hub of all these different journals. It's sort of like they're all going to kind of be collected in there. So you can just do a search at the top and then you should be able to find it. Then when you do find that journal, you see that journal, search the journal name and impact factor, and you're going to see what that level is. If it's below a 1, as Amy says, it's pretty much a crappy journal.
I mean, and I if there's like brand new journals and they go on to be very good, maybe that's an exception. But yeah, for the most part, those, yeah.
And if it's a 4 or a 5, it's pretty good. And then so that's going to kind of be your baseline to see, okay. And then when you're looking at your introduction, which can be pretty manageable because it's not so deep in the science. A lot of times it's written in a way that a layperson can just wrap your head around it, which is great because that's the intimidating part about this.
Yep.
And then go into the results and then taking the discussion with kind of a grain of salt that maybe it's a little bit more of the author's take.
Right. But that can definitely help you digest the results too and like point you in the direction. If you're looking at those results and you're just like, what is this telling me?
Lots of tables and charts.
Right. Then read through the discussion, give it a quick read and then go back and look at the results and read it again and look at the results. With these papers, the point is not that you read it once and you totally get what's going on. Whenever I'm reading them, and I've been trained in this for a lot of years, I still like go back and forth between the methods and the results. It's supposed to be like all of the information contained in one place, but it doesn't read like a book, if that makes sense.
And then some of the things to look at within that, as we said earlier, is it in people or animals?
Right.
Or neither.
And on the topic of, that's basically, I would call that question what is the denominator here?
Okay.
What are we looking at? So if we're looking at an outcome, we also want to know if it's in humans, what kind of humans? Is this all white women between the ages of 50 and 60? That might be okay if it's something about, let's say, like menopause. That might be okay. But if you're saying, I don't know, eating a chocolate bar a day causes high blood pressure, but it's only this very specific group, then your results really only extend to that very specific group. It's not representative of the population.
So people versus animals, and sometimes it's neither. Sometimes it is.
Yeah, sometimes it's in vitro. It could be in a dish. Lots of the recent data that we've learned about Omicron has been in vitro, looking at how does Omicron interact with the antibodies of someone's blood who had 2 vaccines or who was previously infected? That was all done in a lab. It's from human blood, but done in a lab, not, obviously we're not going out and infecting people with Omicron on purpose and measuring what happens to them. That is not ethical.
So in vitro, in a dish, as she said, or like basically what you would think of as like lab or test tube type studies, or it could be in people or in animals, and then kind of taking all of that into account, and then sample size.
Yeah. So I always love to give the example. If you were looking for a restaurant to eat at, and you found one that was 100, 5 stars, but it only had 4 reviews, would you trust it as much as something that was 4.5 stars, but it had 3,000 reviews? So sample size is important because if you're only looking in a very limited set, and there are definitely justifiable instances where you don't need thousands of something, but there's a way to figure out the appropriate sample size. And if you're in a low impact factor journal and they only looked at 4 of something, you might be kind of saying, I don't know if I trust this at all.
And sometimes, 20, 30 may still be sufficient to see. But again, if it's 4 or 5 or 10 individuals.
And it really depends on what you're looking at. So sometimes with in vitro stuff, 4 or 5 is robust and that's good
Right.
enough. For population health, like I just did a couple of prevalent studies to see how many people had been infected with coronavirus in our area. You needed thousands of people for that to really understand. Because if we just went up to 10 random people and tested them, that doesn't really tell us
Right.
anything about anything.
So who's getting tested or
Yep.
what's getting tested? How many? What's that sample size? What are some of the other kind of big takeaways?
Yeah. So one tricky thing, and even people within science sometimes have difficulty with statistical significance, and people will present their statistical significance within the results section, and that just tells you that if it's at a level of p is less than 0.05, that means that it would be less than 5% likely to randomly occur in that way in nature. If you were just looking around. So that's kind of the threshold that a lot of people use. We're also moving away from using just p-values and some other, using some other metrics to see if there are really differences. But essentially the stats will account for things like sample size, how many people were in each group, how many outcomes did we observe, and then are there really differences there? Because you might see a bar graph where one bar is way over the other one, but if it has giant error bars on it, that means that like the variation is just too high. You can't actually tell if those are different or not. So yeah, just seeing differences on like a bar graph or other kinds of graphs, not sufficient. They need to actually go into whether it's statistically significant or not.
And that you would see in the results. You would also see it in the discussion.
Yes. Yeah. That should all be in there.
One of the things that we're going to link to is a page that Amy found that has some fun kind of sensational headlines, which is what initially caught our eye, but they also have these cheat sheets for what to look at. So cheat sheets for statistical significance, like she talked about, also meta-analyses, observational studies. So when you're seeing these RCTs, randomized controlled trials, systematic reviews, what do these things mean?
Yeah.
And so we've got cheat sheets for you that we'll link to.
Those terms should be included in a title of an article. So if I'm doing a meta-analysis, the word meta-analysis is going to be in the title of the study. It'll be, meta-analysis of SARS-CoV-2 literature across the pandemic or something like that.
Tell us what it means. Tell us kind of tell us what that means when something's a meta-analysis.
Yeah. So meta-analysis is looking at a bunch of different people's primary research and then weighting them based on different factors and then comparing to say like, okay, we looked across all these studies. Some were high quality, some were low quality. We're taking that into account. What do we think the actual consensus is here? And so, for example, like, one thing we wanted to figure out early in the pandemic was the infection fatality ratio. So for every 100 infected people, how many people will die? And that varied by geography around the world. It varied based on, how you took that measurement in the first place and figured out how many people had been infected. And so if someone took all of this data from lots of different studies, put it together, weighted it appropriately, and then said, okay, overall, we think that 1% of people die for every 100 infections based on all of the data across the board.
So a meta-analysis is sort of a gold standard. Like if you're able to find a meta-analysis of a topic that you're looking for, this is not just one study.
Right.
It's a review of multiple studies.
Yes. And within a meta-analysis, though, if there's only 2 studies on the topic and that's your meta-analysis, not as strong as if there's 30 studies on the topic. You know what I mean? So yeah, still be careful in looking at it. Just because it says meta-analysis does not mean that everything it says is true to God. But I would say that's a really good place. And that's usually also, there are more of those in a more mature field. So if there hasn't been a ton published, there's no point in doing a meta-analysis, right? So yeah, in new and emerging fields, you might not find those as often.
So don't be suspicious.
Right. Yes.
And then are there certain things that you would want to look at? So talk with us about kind of an observational study versus randomized controlled trials.
Yeah. So a great example of an observational study was the COVID prevalence studies here in Louisiana. We did one in Baton Rouge, one in New Orleans. And when you're doing an observational study, again, the concept of the denominator is really important. So if we want to observe for the city of New Orleans, when testing was really sparse at the beginning of the pandemic, we had no idea how many people had actually been been infected, because you couldn't get a test unless you had very specific, cough, fever, and I can't remember, there was another symptom that was required. So we wanted to say, okay, we need a representative sample of New Orleans. That means by race, age, all these other factors. We want to make a mini New Orleans, and then we're going to test everybody at the same time and see if they are positive for antibodies to the virus or positive for the virus, with a nasal swab. So that is a way to say, okay, within this population, we just want to look, we just want to observe. We're not giving anybody any drugs or treatments or alcohol-free anything. We're just going to look and see what's here. And then we come up with a number of how many people had been infected. So that's an example of an observational study. You could also look at like, what's the prevalence of heart disease or other things like that.
Would it also be like the studies you were talking about in Europe, where they're studying people over decades?
Yes,
and
exactly.
How often did you consume these types of foods and stuff like that? So
and
you're looking kind of historically.
Right. So the difference between those two, my Prevalence study was a cross section. So it was just one time point. Theirs is longitudinal, but they're both observational studies. And then with a randomized controlled trial, that's where you take everybody who would be eligible for your study and says, yes, I consent to participating in research, and you randomly assign them to a treatment arm. So that could be like a placebo versus a drug. It could be, vaccine versus a different vaccine to see if there's any, superiority or inferiority between them. But those ones are the gold standard for evaluating treatments and interventions.
So as you're looking at the journal articles, you'll see some that are referred to as a randomized controlled trial.
Yep.
You'll see others that are observational.
Yes.
You may see the meta-analysis that is kind of looking at many of these put together. And so we have we'll link to it in the episode notes, but a site that has a really efficient little cheat sheet for you on those things. Talk to me about funding. How much does that impact how you perceive? I guess like when I see a study that, soft drinks really aren't that bad for children, and it's funded by the soft drink industry, I'm completely dismissing this.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I think a lot of in academic research and in a lot of health research, especially if you're looking at like outcomes in different groups of people, those are usually funded by entities like the National Institutes of Health or other government, taxpayer funded initiatives. If you get into like drug trials, obviously the pharmaceutical company that owns the drug is going to run the trial, but they are not running the trial like directly with patients. Usually there's a contract research organization that then goes out to different sites like Ochsner, for example, sets them up with all of the protocols and everything else and monitors them throughout. So typically you're not directly interacting with that pharma group, and you don't even you're reporting your data back, but it's not like you're organizing the data and then publishing it or something. It all goes back to that clearinghouse of the pharma company to look at the data, but all those records are kept, as you can imagine, checked, kept, signed. People's initials are next to everything. It's all very like by the book. And then the pharma entity will publish those results, or they could decide, hey, the results weren't great. We're not actually going to pursue this drug. And like, that's the end of that. So I think in that sense, like a pharma company funding a pharma study makes sense. That to me is not suspicious at all. But you're right. When it comes to things like nutraceuticals or I don't know, a kombucha company funding some gut health thing or something like that, you definitely do have to start asking some questions about what are those findings? Are they legit? Who did they do this with? And was it multi-site? Was it just one investigator? And different things like that can make it more or less suspicious.
Right. And so the things that we were talking about earlier, the chocolate or the alcohol and all these different, wine benefits, who's funding it? And again, how would you know if it skewed the results?
Well, so there can be lots of sources of bias. And I think like the researcher bias, I mean, there's straight up fraud in research, and it happens a lot more than we would like to admit. There's a great Twitter personality, Elizabeth Bick. She's a researcher, not just a Twitter personality, but she's one of my favorites. She looks for image fraud in all kinds of scientific papers. So people who duplicate images or Photoshop them, that kind of stuff. She has an eagle eye for it, and it happens like more often than you would like, but she's worth a follow if you're into, fraud and those kinds of things.
I'm going to link to her. I'll get it from you. You had also mentioned some food scientists that you follow on social. We'll link to those in the episode notes too.
The ones I like are really great. But yeah, so things like fraud can happen. And that's why there's a push now in science to, if you're going to publish, like we're trying to publish the Alcohol Free for 40, we're going to have to submit to the journal the database of all of our numbers. So not the people's names, not their MRNs, not any of that kind of
identifying data.
Right. Identifying data, or PHI, private health information. I think it's called that. I'm going to have to double check. But so PHI, we don't include that. But if somebody wanted to rerun our analyses, they should have all the numbers that would allow them to do that. Unless there's something like a publication I did recently that looked at geography and like geographic risk of COVID. So if you have people's zip codes down to a certain level or some other factors, you might have to take those out before, uploading that database.
So like our Alcohol Free for 40 data
Yep.
won't just be us saying, here's the results we
Right,
got.
exactly.
It would be, here's all the raw data.
Exactly.
De-identified, so
Yep.
people's personal information is not there. And then someone could put that into
rerun the analysis
analytics.
And say, hey, did I get the same p-values? Did we see significance at the same rate?
Okay.
And is there anything funky going on with these lab values? Does it look like you just included a bunch of outliers, or anything weird going on
The
there?
problem with that is the average person's not going to be able to do that.
No, right, of course.
So you have to trust that the fraud's not there, or that the bias is not there.
Of course. Yeah. So another watchdog group is called PubPeer. Elizabeth Bick is very involved with them, but they take apart articles, and anything that comes up as being possibly fraudulent, there's statisticians out there who like to do this stuff for fun. So that's who I rely on when I'm like, oh, this was kind of a sketchy. There was actually a really shady publication in the beginning of the pandemic involving hydroxychloroquine. And that was the reason why we started treating people with that. And this guy falsified data. He decided that the 2 people who died in the treatment group should just be excluded from his data. And so many other problems with it. And that was very well detailed on PubPeer. So in reading that, it was like, this is not worth getting into a clinical trial for. This guy is just making stuff up.
Right. Okay. I'm going to link to PubPeer.
Okay, cool.
As well.
Lots of links if you know.
But this is great.
You can start being your own data sleuth. Yeah.
So something that's coming in my head through this entire conversation we've had, when I see research there or a headline that has something to do with nutrition, with wellness, I kind of have an idea if it's bogus or not. Mm-hmm. We had a conversation this past weekend though, and it was specifically, someone said, what do you think about, global warming and climate change? Is this really something we should be worried about? And
yes.
And that was my knee jerk, is yes.
Yes.
But the person said, but is it? And so I took out the Google, and I was, and I looked, and I was scrolling through a few that were a lot of pages that were, a lot of hype type pages.
Yeah. Instantly thumbs down. If it's immediately like exclamation points everywhere, trying to ignite somebody's, emotions, not a good source usually.
Where I landed was nasa.gov, and it had the specifics on what, over the millennia, what has been the history, what has been the change, in temperature, the average temp. And it gave kind of the global scope, but it was very neutral. And I was like, NASA.gov is one that I would look at, of having the facts and not basing it off of emotion. And so nothing to do with nutrition or wellness, but for me, going into a space that I wasn't as familiar to look at, that was one that just in a quick search, it took no time, but I went past those first 7 that were a little bit like, maybe it was Dr. So-and-so or whatever. And it was like someone who's, maybe some sort of like a claims to be whatever it is on like climate expert, and that's not it. And so I'm going to go past that individual or past that website and find.
Yes.
So same with your wellness.
And I feel like, I don't know, the only, I guess TV personality scientist that I trust is Bill Nye. And beyond that, pretty much anyone who's making their living off of fear-mongering tactics and that kind of stuff, like
sensational.
Yeah. And especially when they use doctor in front of their name and they're not really a doctor, there's a couple of those out there.
That's a big one. Doctor in what? And ask.
Yes. Yeah. You can get a PhD in, I don't know, pretty much anything, I'm guessing. And so
Pretty
like, do you
much
have a
anything.
PhD in the field that you're talking about? You know, my PhD is in neuroscience and like preclinical drug development. Do you trust me as an infectious disease person? Well, I've been working closely in that field for a long time. So sometimes it doesn't always match exactly, but it's not like I got my PhD in history and now
Right.
I'm claiming to be, you know everything about vaccines.
Right.
So I feel like people can take different career trajectories, but if it's really far off, then maybe we shouldn't be calling you
Right.
doctor in terms of talking about that topic.
So my NASA example was kind of out there, but it's one that felt like something that I wasn't sure. Well, what is the go-to resource for this? And then looking through this, okay, here's
Yep.
one that I think that I can trust. And even as simple as, do you think that like, okay, the NASA.gov or a .org versus a .com?
Yeah.
Not always.
Yeah. But I would say generally safer. Yeah.
Yeah. So those are some of just the very basic things you can
Right.
do to even when you're first seeing that sensational headline,
Yeah.
if it's on something that is a .org or something that is an official site
Right.
versus the sensational, I'm selling you something.
Right. And yeah, are you selling me something is the biggest question to ask too. Because if someone's saying, vaccines are not the answer and they're going to kill us all. And then they're like, but if you just buy this is honestly a true thing that's happening now, my magic dirt that solves COVID-19. Yep. I thought it was an Onion article, but it wasn't, unfortunately. But yeah, so if someone's selling you magic dirt that you're supposed to eat, you need to take a big step back and start asking some questions because, maybe that's not your best source of information.
On that note,
I think that's a good stopping point.
that's a good stopping point. We could go down that one pretty far. So with that, there's so much with the first of the year, with all this, there's always a ton of sensational headlines. When people are trying to step out with their best wellness foot, especially at the beginning of the year, there's going to be even more. So this is why I wanted to do it now. Get our antenna up,
Yep.
start to think about looking at everything with a little bit of a skeptical eye.
Yes.
It can save us money. It can save us time. It can save us from wasting our energy going down the wrong
frustration,
path.
right?
Frustration, all. So we've got tons of resources.
Yeah. And especially, like you said, with like weight loss and dieting products in the beginning of the year, it's just like they are making you feel shame. And that shouldn't be the answer, I don't think.
Right. And we don't have to do that. Amy has armed us with so much education, so much knowledge. So when we do see something that is causing either a question or we're questioning something that we're doing, questioning something that we thought was maybe the better way to do it, and it's raising all these flags, stop ourselves, not immediately falling prey to this. Question it, go in with that skeptical eye, question it, look at where this is coming from, what's the source, what's that headline, find that journal article, look at it on PubMed. We're going to link to all of these resources for you. And it doesn't have to take a lot of time. You can probably within less than 10 minutes at least weed out, is this legitimate? And even do a little scan of that intro and results. You can just do a quick look and see, does this even exist? First of all, is it on a legitimate site?
Right.
Is this even legitimate research? So you don't have to even take a lot of time to first see, is this something that I should even put my time and energy toward?
Right.
So,
and one of my favorite phrases that my dad always says, usually in relation to finance more than anything else, but if it's too good to be true, it usually is. Or
Right.
if it seems too good to be true, it usually is.
right.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's a good first sniff test.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I am looking forward to having us back for Alcohol Free for
Of
40.
course.
There's so much. Every time I talk with you, there's so much that I learn. And again, how you take things and make it so easy for everyone to understand.
I love it. And you help me understand nutrition so much better too.
Well, thank you.
So, yeah, looking forward to Alcohol Free for 40 for sure this year. And for those of you who haven't tried it, it's actually not as hard as you would think. So I encourage you to try it.
Thanks for the plug.
Yeah.
Can I include a link if someone has a question? How do you feel about anybody reaching out to you?
I feel like that's probably okay, except that my inbox is a nightmare right now. So maybe maybe on LinkedIn.
Yes.
They could reach out with something. Yeah. Cause then that's not like going to get buried in all of the other stuff.
We will then put the LinkedIn
Yeah.
also on here. So we'll have Amy's information that you can see her.
And my Twitter, I guess too.
Yeah. So we'll have Dr. Amy Feehan, her Twitter and her LinkedIn, and those would be the best places to reach her. So if you've got a question, hey, what about this? Or stuff that you just think is interesting that she might think is interesting, or you just want to get her take on it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks
Sounds
for your time.
good. Thank you so much.